talking a little bit about hazmat. One thing you're inclined to forget is after these incidents, when people sort of evacuate their homes, they usually leave their animals behind them. And that becomes a big issue. Because you get dogs doing areas with dogs in them. It's such a hassle. One, the dogs are agitated by the whole messed up environment. And then angry dogs are difficult to deal with. Then we had a couple of angry owners. You know, and they were, I remember we did one owner in Staten Island, he was really mixed up. But he said, well, I'm armed. And then we were with the army. I said, bring it on. We had all these army guys with us. So he said, yeah, but we actually had to take his building down. So that was difficult. He was all messed up with that. So that was a mental health issue, but we actually were with the army at the time. Go ahead.
On the point of taking down buildings, and I wanted to ask both of you this.
Yeah.
Do you actually revoke the certificate of occupancy of that building?
When you demolish a building, you're reinstating it back to an unimproved condition.
When you red tag it, at that point, it should be declared as a dangerous building.
Correct. It's
That's
usually in the
supposed to
city
be
database. Correct.
Right. And you don't allow occupancy until a new CLO is issued.
No, usually until the building is rebuilt and a new CLO is issued. Yeah, it's dangerous to leave that on the because you don't know what's going to happen with the owner. There was one other thing. Yeah, dogs. That's always a problem. Firearms. That's always an issue. Had that issue a couple of times with fires. Let me see what else. Yeah, septic. Talking about hazardous waste. Septics are dangerous. You walk into a septic. We had that a few times with the septic. The lid had blown off. You can't see it, so we ended up walking into the septic a couple of times. That was dirty work. And the white goods. Make sure you tell the owners, empty out everything, the white goods, including the dishwashers, the washing machines, everything. Disconnect all of that stuff and empty them. Fridges are rough after a couple of days. Okay, understanding how structural engineers can use their training as second responders. We're really second responders, we're not first responders. First responders is what agency? Fire, police, right. Uniformed services are, we actually, as engineers and building officials, we really are first responders, okay? Because in these type of incidents, you invoke police powers and you become a first responder. You're working as a proxy for fire department, police. You take the high hat on the building evaluations. So a few days, these are a couple of things that I seem to see as recurring themes. Essential facilities get detailed inspections. You must move that up in your list. And that's for public essential facilities, not private essential facilities. Okay? They're critical because they're used as swing spaces. Mutual aid is critical. That has to be set up long in advance. So the mayor's office, the executive office from city government should have some type of a municipal aid that you can get at. You can bring in people from any municipality if you have your mutual aid. The advantage of mutual aid for a small municipality is you don't get a bill generally. And you only need people for a couple of weeks, but you need skilled people. Okay? It's just to help you out. So make sure mutual aid is ready to go. It's usually from anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. Then you can sort of migrate back to regular operations. Okay? Don't forget, when these occurrences happen, rest of government shuts down because now you can't get the building permits and regular work where there's regular stuff, and people are out of work from that. So you need mutual aid to make sure that your essential workers can start getting back to doing routine work and putting other people back to work and putting them back into their houses and stuff like that. Local municipal assets get exhausted rapidly. You only have a couple of vehicles. Most municipal agencies only have a couple of vehicles. You have an event with one vehicle, a busted tire, broken axle. Not being able to get gasoline is a huge issue. Okay? When the city actually has a problem, New York City has a problem, we usually invoke our police powers and we get tankers of fuel brought to a fueling dock. Tankers of fuel brought to a fueling dock. The city is under contract with a gasoline company and they'll bring tankers direct to a drop-off facility. and they'll fill the cars directly, like once every day or once every 2 days. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious, if you've got people coming in from out of the area and you've got displaced homeowners, do these inspectors or evaluators run into conflicts with places to stay for the 2 to 6 weeks?
Yes, they usually, this is where we are usually to stay, and we're usually sent to convention centers and gym halls, and we're on cots.
Yeah.
That's very typical, and everybody's camping together. Okay, so you can figure it. Do not bring a snorer with you. I brought a guy who was a notorious snorer, and he was ousted from the room. He kept everybody up. It was, and he said it himself. He said, "Oh, I'm a ferocious snorer." He ended up sleeping in the hall, but he was a great inspector. Okay, local municipal assets were exhausted rapidly, and it's not for the faint of heart and for the modest. Everybody's camping in together. That's my experience. Okay, if you're a modest type person, that's sort of difficult to deal with. There's nearly never any cleaning facilities and clothes and stuff. That's kind of not a great. One of the best things to do is find somebody who can find food and sort of beverages fast. And we usually can find somebody who's a good person at spotting where to get that stuff fast. And hooking up washing machines. We did that rapidly when we were in Puerto Rico. Figured out where the washing machines are. We've got water and power to them. People, for some reason, want their clothes clean, and I'm actually one of those people. The other ones that we found were particularly useful is if you can get a barber brought to the facility. That was a huge issue. All the guys wanted their hair cut, I don't know why, because it was hot and it's sticky. And having somebody just made a long deployment a lot more comfortable. It was a funny thing, when we hooked up with a barber, he brought a little generator and he started clipping everybody's hair. Went over like really well. It was a great thing. Didn't cost us much. And he made a bundle in tips. Okay, be prepared for municipal government executive orders. They have to be ready to go. You'll have executive orders for police powers. You'll have executive orders for demolition. You'll have executive orders for not having to pay fees to repair things. People that are respondent or they've been damaged by a natural disaster. It's very expensive to get permits and stuff like that. So a lot of fee waivers for permits. That was ready to go. It seemed to help tremendously with the community. Okay? Government level emergency declarations generally are required for a FEMA deployment. FEMA deployments are very slow. These guys will stay on site for a long time, but the advantage of a FEMA deployment is you get money. FEMA's real big advantage is they cut checks. And a lot of people really need FEMA for the money. They also bring amazing technical support, but they're slow and it takes them a while to get up and going, and they're usually in conflict with the municipal agencies. It takes a while to get that system going together. But FEMA are really, they're super, super good, but it takes a while for the municipal agencies to interlock. They work very, very different strategies. Go ahead.
Are you referring to FEMA specifically or FEMA government contractors as well that they deploy on?
Government contractors are usually pretty quick. I'm just talking about the FEMA organization. Okay? Go ahead.
One other thing about, we were talking about the Good Sam law in Oregon. It
Yep.
actually isn't triggered until there's a governor declaration of
Correct.
emergency, so people should watch out. They should.
You got to keep an eye on that. The governor may be slow to issue the declaration of emergency. Well, I'm not too sure because we have to subjugate to the federal government. I don't want the feds in here. I heard it all. But what they're missing is to pull the trigger on financing. That's really what helps. And mutual aid. I heard it. We saw it in Puerto Rico. San Juan was one municipal agency and the feds were another. And it was very distinct operations. It took a while for them to interlock. They got there in the end, but it took a while. FEMA will send staff and help organize, but watch, their administrative requirements are onerous. Everything has to be followed. When you're doing mutual aid, it can be very loosey-goosey. You can catch up with the paperwork afterwards. Okay, mutual aid and getting people on the street, you can sort of work it out for a couple of weeks locally in an unofficial capacity because you're under an emergency declaration. But working with FEMA, it's extremely onerous. Okay, they are regulated by documentation because they got burnt after Katrina because of the amount of people the malfeasance with payments in Katrina. They became extremely onerous with their paperwork. Okay? And they got cited statutorily for their looseness on giving out money after Katrina. After 4 weeks, if the building is not destroyed or structurally competent, generally you can go back to a regular business after about 4 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks, you're sort of back in regular business. Staff have to be trained in this continuation of operations. Tabletops, collector apps, and paper. It's bad to start everybody up on an incident. It doesn't matter how much you have to train them, but there should be some familiarity with how the system works. I think it's wonderful that Portland is outreaching and making sure that this thing happens. And I've done a number of these trainings, but you'd be surprised at the amount of time small places that you wouldn't think needs assistance ends up needing assistance, and they already have a jump on their training and being able to outreach. I'm always surprised by that. Oh, it's going to happen in 500 years, I've had this stuff, and then all of a sudden everybody's, you got boots on the street because you've had some incident. And it could be something as small as a gas explosion, downtown gas explosion. But if it kills 2 or 3 people or 4 people, you will have a major response on your hands. If you have the public getting killed in an incident, that will change the tenor of a response. You'll get real attention on that if you have public killed in an incident. Okay? Collector apps, GIS. You'll need an ops team for any type of collector 1, 2, 3. Any type of phone GIS system, you'll need operators working that thing. DOB was constantly short of having skilled GIS operators in our facility. And we have a staff of 1,600 super skilled people. I mean, DOB knows how to run incidents and accidents. We get them on a regular basis. Department of Buildings. And I have done so many, you wouldn't have any idea. But these incidents, large incidents, are run based on technology.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
You were talking about 4 weeks. Are you suggesting then that when planning, you need to get enough staff to do these evaluations to be done in about 4 weeks?
That's my experience, 2 to 6 weeks. 4 weeks.
To have the building safety evaluations completed?
Most of the operations are done between 4 and 6 weeks, yeah. The initial ones. Doesn't mean your follow-up is. Your follow could go for years. What will happen is, the first call you get is, how many people got damaged? How many fatalities have we got? How many people do we have to house? How many buildings are damaged? You will hear that rapidly from the mayor's office every day for 4 weeks. And then after that, they'll say, okay, are we beginning to go back to regular operations? Or are we able to put people back into their neighborhoods? Can we put people back in their homes? The issue is, if you do not do that, the city and the municipal agencies have to maintain them, have to house them, and you get urban blight. I had a job in Staten Island again, where I spent most of my time. Most of the damage from Sandy was in Staten Island. And one neighborhood, there was a group of kids stealing kitchen cabinets. I don't know why they wanted kitchen cabinets, but they rifled the neighborhood for kitchen cabinets. And it was a security issue. The houses actually weren't that badly damaged, but everybody was ousted. And the local kids were hitting up the kitchens and taking the cabinets out. I do not know why. They must have some business going on. And all the owners were pissed because there was no damage done to the house, but they managed to wreck their kitchens. Okay. Organizational structure. We used, in New York City, we have a professional project management system in New York City called the Office of Emergency Manager. They are project managers. And we use a command element. This is what everybody does, it's a federal program. Operations, planning, logistics, finance, general. Operations, day-to-day stuff. Planning sections, logistics, this is a big one. How do you get your cars, get gasoline, who's delivering food? Finance. Interestingly enough, for people that are coming in and you're getting paid, you gotta pay them, okay? So if you're pulling in other agencies, and you're putting other municipal employees to work, sanitation, police, all of these other city agencies, somebody's got to pay them. And you got to keep an eye on those tickets. It'll come out of an emergency fund. So these are generally the way it's set up. Nothing unusual about this. You're totally familiar with it.
But
Go ahead.
Can you go back to that slide? I just want to point out that all of the building safety evaluations, those happen in that operations section.
Correct. This is your day-to-day operations.
And especially for us that are involved in buildings, those other 3 sections, planning, logistics, and finance, they're all supporting and enabling those building safety evaluations to happen. Their
One
whole
of the most
reason
skilled
for
people
working.
in this business is sitting right there. Worked in Office of Emergency Management and did multiple deployments with me. Very skilled. Fast, rapid deployments. No room to warm up. Work on the first day you get to wherever you're going, you're working by 6 o'clock. You're not sitting around dropping off your laundry, getting your bunks set up. You're on the street already when you arrive and wherever you're going. That's how fast we're able to operate these things.
So in Washington, you're correct, the building safety evaluators are under operations, but from the state level, logistics, ESF 3, emergency support function 3, has treated the building safety evaluators like dump trucks. Oh, we need to order something. How do we get that? So in the state emergency management plan, building safety evaluators are identified in the...
There's a resource.
As a resource.
As a resource.
Yeah.
Expendable resource.
Yeah.
Expendable resource.
But that's when you need more than what you've got in your own municipality, when you need aid from outside.
Yeah.
This,
That's a state.
in New York City, we have a SEER committee. I'm a part of that. It's just an emergency response committee. It's where we cluster all our engineers, private engineers, and we work in conjunction with the municipal agency. We do training. My colleague here is a member of structural engineers, but it's a nationwide organization of structural engineers, and you need to be ready to go. Okay? And it's called the SEER committee in New York, and we train everybody. And then the first thing that happens is we have a big, massive event in Florida, and they say, "Are we going anywhere?" I said, "We never got a call." Happens all the time. I said, "But we might get a call, but we more likely we'll end up doing something in New York City." Okay? And then the other thing is FEMA. It's very regulated. Form a collaborative planning team, which is basically what we're doing today. Understand the situation, determine goals and objectives, develop the plan, prepare the plan, implement and maintain the plans. What all we're doing today. Everybody's doing this federally. It's smart because it's expensive to get this thing off the ground when you have an incident. And the other issue is, I saw people killed in Sandy. I saw it with my own eyes because we had to go out and collect them and try and get into unsafe buildings. Okay, so you don't want that in your hands if you can avoid it. Every person that's ready to get out to the street to evaluate an unsafe building is one less person that gets injured. And after my colleague mentioned it, that I overlooked something, is these tremors. A building that looks okay today may not be okay on a recurring event tomorrow and the next day. So you got to be conservative about those dangerous buildings. You know, make sure you don't leave anything on your portfolio that actually turns into another unsafe building. It's very easy to be talked into leaving somebody in a building when it's structurally damaged. It's a very risky thing to do. It's happened to me loads of times. I want to just stay in here, I'm going to be okay. And then what happens is you get this secondary event that really renders the building too dangerous. Okay, this is the amount of agencies that are deployed in New York City. Maybe it's only one guy, maybe it's 10 people, maybe it's half a dozen, colleagues, but mostly you'll have somebody from all of these agencies. And this is what you'll have, only a smaller version of this. Small businesses are affected, that's the commercial ventures. Social services, who's providing food. Sanitation, these guys are save all of these dense urban areas. Sanitation is a huge issue. People throw all of the stuff out on the street and sanitation has to get rid of it. All the carpets and the ceilings, none of that stuff is shipped by a private contractor. It's all done by the municipal agency. Department of Ed, you got to get the kids out of the house because you can feed them in the school. All of these agencies. Department for the Aging. You have a building over 6 stories, Department of the Aging looks after all of these guys. You can't get them out of the building. The stairs are too long. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting thing. You wouldn't have imagined that this is as cumbersome as it is, but it turns out to be deployed every time we have an incident. For storms in New York City, we've been looking south. These guys really have their acts together now. The storms come from the Caribbean, and they just roll up the East Coast into New England. But as these storms are tracking, all of these coastal towns are becoming more and more skilled at putting these plans together. And it's diminishing the need for response mutual aid. We very rarely get called from Texas and Florida anymore, and we used to go down there pretty regularly. One, they want to keep the money themselves. They do get federal money. If you're paying all the mutual aid, you're giving the money away. Okay? And also getting rid of all of their junky housing, these storms. That's not uncommon. That was PR, Puerto Rico, after the hurricane. That's very typical. That's kind of what you get. Blue roofs, you know, people already with the tarps on the roofs. There's a program, the FEMA has a program called the Blue Roofs program, which is to get a temporary roof on the house and keep the water out. And then if you have a blue roof, what can you do with the people that are inside the building? You can put them back in. You don't get urban blight. Okay? All right, residential. This is important. RCPO, residential. It's the bulk of everything you're going to do. It's the highest numbers, but it's the simplest. It's the simplest buildings. Buildings over 7 stories, engineered buildings. Buildings over 7 stories are usually engineered. They perform generally well. They're engineered buildings. They're not wood framed, prescriptively designed 1 and 2 family residential buildings. They're not out of a pattern book. Sorry. Okay, 2%. Okay, residential. Over 7 stories, the percentage is nothing. Okay? So it's nearly all 1s and 2s is what you're going to do. Commercial, privately owned buildings. What's the problem with these things? You're rarely going to be in there. You're rarely going to be in a commercial building. But the problem with them is they're usually in the public way. So that's what I mean.
That's a timer.
Is that what it is?
Somebody's got a timer on the slide.
Can you switch that? Who knew? I didn't. IT, is there a kid in the room? I need like a 16-year-old, please. Okay. Prescriptive and engineered commercial, they're in the public way. Be careful of those. Because aftershock on commercial buildings are very dangerous. Even if you think it's okay, usually it'll be on the public way. And a lot of people will be in and out of there. Publicly owned buildings are great because you can house a lot of people, you can do food distribution there. But you have to get to them early. And others are empirically houses and churches, houses of worship. We talked a little bit about houses of worship, civil work, bridges, dams. You may end up having to do some of that work just to help out. Okay, but the percentages are low. This is for FEMA. They don't want to hear from you if the following, and it's new. They only started this a few years ago. A structure's interior is intact, specifically but not limited, you're going back in. Yeah. I'm not going that slow. I think I'm going pretty quick. Okay? Because I go through these things pretty quick. All right, here we go. This is important. FEMA. They won't pay you if any of these things are in effect. The structure's electricity are functional. And interiors is intact, specifically not limited to support. They want you back in. The structure's access and egress is clear and functional. The septic is functional. The structure as well is functional. What's not there? Power and light and heat. They don't care if the building's dark and you don't have heat. You can put on an extra sweater and you can walk around with a flashlight. But they want you back in the building. Go ahead.
In these kinds of seismic events, though, particularly, are you seeing septic systems survive? Are you seeing sewer systems survive? I would think that for the most part, those would be disrupted immediately.
You would imagine that to be the case, but when you're doing rapid evaluations, the septics are rarely checked.
Huh?
Yeah. Even when I was in Puerto Rico, I rarely saw a septic. The only time I see the septics compromised is when the lids are blown off them.
Yeah.
The rest of it is concealed below grade, you can't see them.
So it's treated as functional regardless of whether, I mean, it's at this point it's pumping sewage into the ground.
Correct.
So good enough in FEMA's eyes.
Correct.
For these, okay.
That's what I got.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's right.
No,
that's
no,
what I
but
got.
that's...
If you have these, don't expect a bill. Don't expect a check from FEMA. So people say, I want a check because I've been displaced, and then they say, well, you have a functional house, we'd love to give you a check. The standard check that FEMA were giving was 30 grand, and that's very enticing for somebody in a habitable building. Okay? And even after the checks went in, they didn't fix the buildings. We saw it in Puerto Rico a lot. Okay? Next. Is that me? I'll do that. Okay, that's your standard forms, red, yellow, green. Now, I'm not saying people shouldn't be using the placards. The problem with placards is it's become obsolete when you're using digital systems, with the exception of red. These ones are usually worth keeping because the numbers are small. So it's okay to post a red building, but they're time consuming because you have to put in a lot of information. When you're hitting numbers, it's very time consuming doing this. And having red stickers really needs, you need a vehicle, and you're not, and if you're carrying them in a bag, it's a lot to carry. I've done it before. Yellows and greens, spray the gates and keep them on the digital, because it's interesting. You may not be revisiting that building, but many other agencies will be behind you. Fire will revisit it. The insurance company will revisit it. The owner's engineer may visit it. Somebody else is going to visit it. And sometimes that may not be reflected in the sticker anyway. Okay? So that's what my experience is using this. When we were in Puerto Rico, we got rid of the stickers. It was far too time consuming, and then some people didn't want them stuck in the house. It was a mess. So it was better just to spray the gate post. Go ahead.
But the restricted use kind of says, hey, you can only come in through this door, or hey, only for this long of a time. I understand the digital value of sending it to the municipality, but for people going in that building, how do they know?
Everything you're saying is true. And we're talking generally about habitable buildings getting posted. But my experience is a lot of agencies moved away from stickers. It doesn't mean you should move away from stickers. But when you are using GIS and you're tracking a lot of stuff using GIS, it's just what I'm seeing in the field. I'm not saying it's the right practice. And when we told the municipal agencies to go back and poster the buildings written in Spanish, they didn't do it regardless. So when I told the municipal agencies I want those buildings stickered, send an agent back to the building and have them stickered, they didn't do it even after we asked them to. So that's my experience. I'm just telling you what I've seen.
So you're just saying in practicality, especially if you're working at speed, just stickers for red.
Stickers for red.
Or placards.
Placards. That's my experience. Doesn't mean it's right. But even when I was in Puerto Rico, very few buildings I came across weren't habitable. They were damaged, but they were habitable. Okay? And in New York City, by the way, the same thing. Anything that was red, we took down.
So then you just carry like a paint can, because you said mark the gate.
Correct. I usually had the municipal. I would do the surveys or had my staff, and then the municipal person who was doing nothing anyway was walking around. They were usually administrative staff because they were dialoguing with the owners when we were doing something else, and then we would spray the gates. It was just more efficient that way.
So in most cases, are you just putting red tags on the front door and noting it so that when you do go back through and you're tearing down buildings that were unsafe, these would be the first ones to be taken care of?
Right. And that was an issue. If you don't have it in some type of digital system, it was difficult to track them.
Right.
Very difficult to track them. The addresses were difficult to track. The owners sometimes took the tags off the buildings. There was all types of shenanigans. Go ahead.
What about right of entry if nobody's home?
We don't. We try to do as much as you can from the outside. If nobody's home, we do not go in. Yeah. Okay. It's not worth the trouble.
Do you go on the property and walk around?
Yeah, you can do that. You could go around the outside, or if it's easy to get in, you're in the neighbors, I will do that. I'll have the guys, but generally we don't trespass because there could be somebody sick in the house or something. Generally, there's no need for a trespass. You could say we can revisit it. The numbers will be small. Most homeowners generally want you in there. They need the record for something else they're doing. Okay? So even when we're interviewing owners in one of the municipal, building departments where we have all the owners in to talk about stuff, they'll say, well, I can't get in today. And they say, it's okay, you can go in and walk around my property. And we would have, these were the executive orders we had ready to go. Right of entry, demo. And then if they were insured, we generally let them sort out the demolition on their own, but the buildings got demoed. If they were insured. If they were not insured, the city paid for the demo. And they did not get a bill. Okay. I'm not saying that works for everybody, I'm just saying it works for us. Okay, and this is very typical. We did placard this, usual stuff. Okay, residential, I talked a little bit about this. Try and bring that away with you. RCPO, it's a useful thing to have. Building departments and really have 3 bureaus. They have a planning bureau, which is the development side, it's the pre-permit side. Most building departments always have the planning side, the permit side. Everything to get you to permit. They rarely have the 2 other bureaus, which is compliance and enforcement. Compliance means you're double checking something that's already there without a violation on it, like an elevator, something dangerous inside the building is high risk. You'll send, and a building department might have an agent or 2 doing that work. Or enforcement, usually there's 1 or 2 guys just doing tickets, failure to maintain, non-compliance. So you have development, compliance, and enforcement. Okay? Every building department will have a development wing. It'll be well staffed. It's the permitting side, gets you to pre-permit. And once you get to the permit, after that it goes compliance and enforcement. Most municipal agencies do not have compliance. They may have an enforcement of 2 persons. And that's it. So when you're deploying people from an office, they're going to be on the pre-permit side. They may not have an awful amount of field experience. When you're really grabbing everybody to go in and do these evaluations, the real numbers are in pre-permit side. Okay, Puerto Rico 2000. This is very primitive, and that's what you can expect to see. Everybody on bench seats. And that's very typical. Trees down, even in an earthquake. You'll get trees down, it goes right into the building. And this guy had a family, needed to be in there for some reason. Okay? And then this is what happens when you have no power. At night time you're trying to upload, there's a cell tower somewhere that you're trying to hook up onto. And then this is how you do food distribution. Okay? That's food distribution. All the stuff is trucked in. That's your collector app on the phone. That's actually an image of my phone. And this is very simple, detailed, rapid. And then they have, screens that toggle through. Earthquake, failure to maintain, previous damage, no damage. Is it a total loss? Is there a roof penetrated? Very, very simple, so you can move at volume. Okay? And that comes up screen after screen on your phone. Go ahead.
I just want to mention to people that our GIS person at the City of Portland did develop this, and it's available in Survey 123. He's happy to share that if anybody else. You guys have to have your own ArcGIS system, but he can share the programming.
Very difficult to tag this stuff if you don't have GIS. These building evaluations, because everything starts to blur at the end of the day. You really need to have these things taggable. And this is what you can get out of it. This is what the mayor's office wants, the elected officials. Abandoned, destroyed, inspected, restricted use, unsafe, abandoned, destroyed, inspected. And this is modified windshield and rapids. This is real high volume number, and rapid assessments is where you're walking around the properties and inside and around the properties quickly. You need dashboards. And that's what you end up at the end of the day. Every day these things are being, and you can post a dashboard anywhere. It can go to anywhere. We used to send these things back to New York to show what we were doing every day. And the local government agencies needed it as well to see what's our volume. How many are we doing? If we can get to 16,000, what's left on the books when we walk away from there after 6 weeks? There was 40,000 buildings we tried to do in Puerto Rico on the second deployment, and we were through 16,000 in about 10 days. And the guys were really flying because the collector apps really, the 1, 2, 3 survey 1, 2, 3 really speeded up. Look, it's mostly residential housing, that's what you're going to get. Okay? It's just getting to it and collecting the information on it. Launch GIS, how we did it at damage assessment information collected via smartphones and aerial. Volunteer analysts from 7 This is the GIS analyst, volunteer GIS analysts from 7 city agencies perform visual analysis and process data. You really need data people in the back end. I know that went a little fast because we're covering Katrina, Sandy, 2 deployments in Puerto Rico, 1 in Mississippi, and 2 in Buffalo in that presentation. So it's a lot to cover in 45 minutes. So I know that went a little fast. Go.
This is open for other people's questions, but I wanted, can you tell us just about Superstorm Sandy? Like, how many buildings did you look at?
66,000.
66,000?
Correct.
And how many people looked at them? Like, how many?
Hundreds.
People
We had
coming
to pull
in
in,
from
we had to pull
outside?
in engineers from every agency and every, and we did more than one evaluation of every property. So we did now that was before we had survey 1, 2, 3. So the problem was fire department had gone through the city very quickly and told us kind of what to expect, but they didn't record the information. So we were starting off from scratch. We had to do our own windshields. And it was really time consuming.
And how long overall did it take? To
6
get-
weeks.
6 weeks to get 66,000
6
buildings
weeks, right.
inspected with hundreds of people.
Hundreds. We took in probably 200 or 300 engineers from outside and probably 200 or 300 engineers and architects from the city. Remember, the city has Department of General Construction, Sanitation, Department of Buildings, Department of Citywide Administration, hospitals. All of these guys have engineers. But I'll tell you, it's not glamorous work. After a couple of days, these guys don't want to do it anymore, the people that we were working with. They said, it's enough for me. 2 or 3 days and that was it. It was fatiguing work. You're on your feet the whole time. And after a couple of days of that, we had volunteers. The steady volunteers were the younger kids with the stamina. They turned up every day. I don't have to, I'm an old guy too, so I do this on a regular basis. But doing 6 weeks of it is fatiguing work. Okay? You have to drive around, you need a driver, you need a buddy, you need to be fed, you need provisions, you need clothes, you need sanitation, you need somewhere to sleep at night. You need to get home to feed the dog. Okay, so all of that type of stuff. Go ahead.
With all those volunteers coming in and all those buildings to evaluate, how did you kind of assign folks to different areas? How did you do that organization?
We did it by what's called a community board. You can do it by zip code. It's actually a good question. You can compartmentalize your city depending on electioneering areas. It's a very good way to do it because electioneering usually has a demographic cut in it. You need some data with a boundary on it. You don't arbitrarily assign people to a neighborhood. You really need a boundary. And we did it by zip codes and we did it by community boards, which are electioneering community boards. What you really want to do is you do not have people make up their own designation and their own boundary conditions, their own meets and bounds. Because what happens is you'll never know who is regulating, who had all the data inside that community board. You have to find those zip codes. Usually zip codes will do it. They're usually small enough. It's a small enough area that you can usually grab it with a zip code. And you can't have somebody running out of work after 50 buildings. So you have to give them a couple of hundred buildings at the beginning and say, go out and do everything in this neighborhood. And that's what we would do. We would do block by blocks. They're called block by blocks. But we would parse them out by what's called community boards. And that's a good question.
And what is a community board?
It's an electioneering community. You'll find that
Do you mean like the Democratic Party caucus of the county
Correct.
and the Republican? Is that
Yeah,
what you
they'll
mean?
have everybody inside the community. They'll know exactly who's inside their electioneering areas, their election boundaries.
Okay. Or you could do it by zip codes, which is
You
just
could
a
do it by zip-
geographical
Correct.
boundary.
Or you could do geocoding. Problem with geocoding is not all the agencies you're working with have them. If you use something that's a known entity, you can get at sanitation data, you can get at police data, you can get at hospital data, you can get at who's running the area, for health and hospitals. You can figure out municipal areas, and you can figure out, once you have the boundaries inside those areas, you can figure out who else has information inside those boundary conditions. What we actually found in Puerto Rico is one guy had all the GIS maps, and he was not being shared by one of the agencies. Remember this?
Was it the guy that carried around the printer?
Yeah, there was a guy in Puerto Rico, we hooked up with him, but it took us a while to find him.
Yeah.
But he had all the GIS maps.
But most of us are working in small municipalities or large municipalities, so we have access to that data. Like we know, all of you from municipalities know all of that for your town, right? Where the hospitals are and where all that is.
If you have 1,000 buildings, you'd assign it inside a district, inside, if everybody knew what the inner city limits were here, you'd give, if you had 1,000 buildings, you'd give that to one team. And maybe have 3 rotations of one team in here.
But since plans examiners, or since some people are qualified to do residences and maybe only structural engineers can do a 10-story building, does it make sense to divvy it up by what's residential and what's commercial?
10-story buildings are going to be so rare that you can parse those guys out on an assignment basis. General practitioners get volume. It won't matter about the 10-story building. There's going to be a commercial building. There's going to be an engineer already on it generally. The numbers are going to be small, and the likelihood of damage is likely small. So when you get these sort of these outlier buildings, they look like they're very important, but you'll find that the numbers are small. So you can target them with a crew. You don't have to have a special team. You could have a special team, but generally the owners of these larger buildings will have their own engineers anyway. And to tie up, especially municipal engineer doing a commercial building, could be problematic. You might be better off sending that specialty engineer to do 5 essential facilities than spend it going down and doing Bank of America down the street where they already have an engineer. That might be a better use of their people. And then say, give me an update when you get a chance and let me know. Even for a skilled engineer to do a building over 10 stories is slow. You have to look at every space inside there. When you're doing detailed evaluations, you have to walk every space. And they're time consuming most of the time, there's nothing to see. Go ahead.
From a non-building perspective, when you talk about all the different engineers that came in, how do you track the resources that are coming in so that way they can go, are those community boards the ones that are intaking them and then making sure that they're?
EOC. That is the purpose of the EOC. And you will have a logistics team behind that. They are running the shop. You will have the most skilled organizational people sitting in the worst room in the office with the least amount of provisions. So they must be fed and watered. And and they run 18 hours, those shops. They are doing all the back end work, processing data. They are the most important. The rest of us are just disposable entities. Who said that? Was you, I think, right? Yeah. The engineers out there will have 100 of them. Whether you have 100 or 90 or 105, it's unimportant. You'll get there in the end. But to have a good logistics team running this outfit is tremendously valuable because you're not wasting assets in the field trying to figure out where do I go next. It's a good question.
Another question.
Go ahead.
Have you had issues with like owners after an event? Owners will hire rent-a-cops as security, which will prevent rapid assessments from being able to occur.
No, not when the municipal agencies have invoked police powers. Commercial properties will never. We wouldn't want to be in a place where somebody else, it's a waste of assets. Let them have their own engineers. But generally, if you have to validate something that's not, secured areas are very, very rare. And usually if you have police powers, we hi-hat everybody, including owners.
We had that happen in our jurisdiction. We had a massive fire.
Okay.
Destroyed 14 buildings.
Yeah.
And rent-a-cops were brought in and prevented rapid assessments.
But you know what I do? I would have written the owner interfering in a government instrument. That usually brings them to Jesus pretty quickly. Interfering with a government instrument is the first thing I write them. And that is a criminal ticket. Okay, that's what I do, is I tell them it's fine, we love to work with you, but you interfere with our business so we can't do an evaluation on this. It may be, and we don't have a problem walking around with somebody. But that inspection is going to go. Everybody's working for the city official. He's the highest ranking person in the room, not the owner. Highest ranking person in the room is the city official. Outranks ownership. Okay.
Well, just backing up to the earlier question, you were talking about the difference between the evaluators who are out in the streets and the persons who are back in the EOC operating. Yeah. In the California Safety Assessment Program, Oregon's new program, I don't know about Washington Safe, but they do have a distinctive role called the coordinator. role
Yeah.
as opposed to the evaluator role.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if that coordinator role was something that was recognized officially in the work that you've done before, through ATC 20 deployments compared to what we're talking about here.
ATC didn't ever think of thought of an EOC.
Yeah.
ATC is early. It was long before this thing was formalized with an incident command, with the command element. That federal command element came in after Katrina, really.
Oh, right.
And ATC 20 was before that.
Yes. Well, so for us, I think we're still, I don't know how much it's still being negotiated, I guess, but we've got this coordinator role that I think it's good to hear you validate the importance of that versus the evaluators.
You could not run these incidents the way they're moving so fast without. The real problem is going to be the elected officials. You will not have data for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll cost somebody their job. It usually costs a skilled city official, a civil servant their job, because the mayor's office is going to turn around and say, I can't get information, put somebody into that job that gives me information. And they're right, they're elected officials, they're representing the public, and they need data, and the press needs data. And they'll need somebody information. This is why GIS became so, because it took the burden of this real-time data transfer out of the hands of the people who are running the shop. Once the information was uploaded to a public domain website that was shared with this, it took the burden off a liaison from the EOC, from the command element. And you will find that actually the city had one or two very skilled Office of Emergency Management who were particularly good at dealing with the elected officials. They were particularly skilled at that role. And they were usually cherry-picked early to go down and sort of work that communication. Public domain data is critical on this stuff. You've got to share the information. Secrets is damaging because it gives people opportunity to say something's not going on. And the guys are working like dogs out there. You need to get the information out. Questions? Anybody else questions?
Just curiosity, when you said all those engineers came in from other places,
Sandy did, yeah.
Were they mostly private contractors or were they a part of another government entity?
Combination of both. We still didn't have enough people. When you're doing 66,000 rapid evaluations, you're doing it by paper, and your vehicle, and you're driving around the place, and you need 2 people for every evaluation, and you're out in an area where there's urban sprawl, you can't do the evaluations in numbers. But if you're in a dense urban area, downtown area, you can hit real numbers. So it was just trying to get through the numbers. We would never have done Sandy the way we've done it had we had a collector app, or 1, 2, 3, because the real issue is we had no data going back to the mayor's office. It was slow to download the information, put it on the spreadsheet. It was very primitive. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, how did you prioritize buildings for inspection, and who did the prioritization come from?
How did we prioritize what?
Prioritize the assessment. What buildings are you going to assess first?
Public buildings, essential facilities were the first things always, and they got a detailed evaluation.
And that came out of EOC?
Came out of the EOC. We went to hospitals. We went there. This is where the liaison started. We started with hospitals. We started with PD. We did not do FD, fire department. They usually handle their own. And we went to schools. Schools was critical. Schools always have big gymnasiums. Go ahead.
But who decided that? Was it the EOC that said, here's a list of what you're going to do? Or was it the building officials that said, we think these are the most important?
It's kind of common sense, just because it's what you're going to use. Like the gymnasiums you're going to use, you're going to get people in there with gun displays.
It's in
I
the
think in a
program.
smaller EOC too,
Yeah,
you're all in the same room and you'd be like, go to this school.
You'll find that there's not many of each. There'll be 30 schools, 10 hospitals. You just need a list of them and get out there fast. And we use them as swing spaces. Think of it, was the real issue we had in Puerto Rico is because you couldn't get the kids into the schools because the schools simply said the parents couldn't leave the house. And that was overlooked. And once we figured out the parents couldn't leave the house, the kids couldn't be getting visitors. Everybody got in to do school evaluations immediately. And we changed it like after 2 or 3 days. I was one of the guys that said, get everybody to do the schools, clear every school out. There was no damage in any of the schools. They were nicely built. And they were empty.
And that's not usually too, like, where they get fed
That's why we wanted them in there.
Yeah, it takes that
It got
total
this-
burden off
It
of.
got the kids into something, they were getting regular meals, it got the teachers supervising them, it got their parents out, and everybody was like in each other's,
Many
business.
times they also have like power and.
They have power, right.
backup, where they don't have that at home,
Correct.
and that was why it's like the best place to do
It
first.
was strange, and we did it with the colleges, and it was extremely successful, and there was no damage, and we did it fast. We
When-
got them organized fast. Go ahead.
We had an interview with Los Angeles to talk about one of their earthquakes. And one of the things they told us that I'm planning to implement was that they had 12 or 15 identified buildings, their top priority buildings, and they had teams of structural engineers and whoever they needed. Those people knew to self-deploy to those buildings when there was an earthquake.
Yes.
They would just go and report back. And they exercised it once a year of like, that this is your building, then they would kind of look at that.
We did that in New York City, but you need to be in a big conurbation to really cherry pick those. In small municipal agencies, in small municipal areas, usually that's overlooked. In New York City, we have these mock-up deployments where we use the airports, where we use schools, we pick an area and we all go out and we train there. It was an all-night deployment. Can you run an EOC from there? Can you move your operations? Can anybody go down there? That's for New York City. We've got 9 million people in New York City on a daily basis. We're pulling in 20 million, every day from people coming in and out, commuting in and out that are out in the outer boroughs. But that's in New York City. But in a small area, you won't have that. And you may find that depending on where the earthquake is, you need everything around that area. As opposed to saying, I need something that's in another county, it's just the wrong spot. You can't bus anybody over there. So you need to do those evaluations fast. If you find there's minor damage throughout your municipal area, deploy everybody to double check those schools because you can use them as hubs. And that's what we found. And all that. And also essential facilities, the numbers are small. You do them fast, only 10% of your buildings, maybe 5%. But they get detailed evaluations. Every aspect of that building gets checked. Go ahead.
Sandy was multi-jurisdictional,
Yeah.
multi-state.
Yep.
Did you have somebody triaging resources across all the different jurisdictions, or as New York, you just said, hey, send us everyone? How did that work?
It was just New York.
Yeah.
Well, everybody else, Long Island was better organized than we were.
Uh-huh.
But they did themselves.
Yes. But they were much better organized because they were using a centralized data dump for sanitation mostly. So the guys from sanitation knew where everything was. It turned out that these guys from sanitation were really the agencies that we were hooking up with because they had trucks on the road all the time. They knew every neighborhood. They didn't require a fire department. So we did a lot of work with sanitation. They were critical. And they never complained.
And then a couple other comments. One, British Columbia Housing has added to their equipment list dog biscuits.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Unless you're going up into grizzly country, and then they suggest to go.
We used to bring baseball bats.
Yeah.
We problems with dogs with baseball bats is the only answer.
Yeah. And then the purpose of the coordinators could be, like in small jurisdictions, they may not have been able to set up and how to respond to this. So having a coordinator go in and say, hey, we need red placards, we need emergency caution tape, we need it. So that's one way a coordinator could be used. Another way is that you've got several hundred people doing evaluations. They may be looking at the evaluations on a daily basis, making sure that people are doing it consistently. So there's different roles for coordinators that realize that could be used.
You will find that the skill level varies tremendously with the evaluators, but you kind of get there in the end.
Yeah.
The evaluations are done, they're kind of simplistic and the buildings are relatively simple. If you got something that's tricky, what we would do is we'd have a strike team dealing with that. I would occasionally get a call, I'm a big numbers guy, I would always hit a lot of buildings, but they say, we need you to go to a school, we have a problem with the school. And then I would say, they would swap out at time, so we would have a strike team for buildings that are problematic. And your most skilled
Would you
guys.
define a strike team?
The most skilled guys and the fastest guys you got.
But-
And the guys who can do a size up on the building fast.
And
Structural
strike
engineers.
teams are all structural, and they're all
All
one type of resource.
It could be an architect. We have skilled architects that are very good at doing. They just don't dawdle. They can then go in, scope out a project, and they can say, "This is a problem. We're going to need more horsepower here. We need to bring somebody else in. I need a really good engineer." But usually it was a school. We had a school that was actually quite badly damaged. It got overlooked. It was one of the few buildings I vacated, public buildings, when I was in Puerto Rico the last time. Go ahead.
To help with that, the equip team you reviewed, that would be like a strike team. That everybody needed to take care of. That'd be a really in-depth one, but that's the idea, that you just have a group that does it.
Actually, FEMA has a really clear designation of what is a strike team and what isn't. And one kind of team is all structural and engineers. It's all the same kind of resource, which is not what we have in equip. We might have an elevator person, and we might.
Well, the
we
reason
have
there is
different-
because you want to be occupied right then, right? But if you have a more general question about the safety, then you could have a strike team, like the FEMA resource manager, or the resource typing, something like that, so.
But we're kind of using strike team in a generic way of like, these are some cutting edge people that go in quickly and just are looking for one thing. And that sounds like kind of how you're using it.
If you're looking for us today to do hardened definitions, statutory definitions, this is not really the environment for it, because you will do an 8-hour class on this. What we're doing is giving you 30 years of experience boiled down at a number of deployments so you get the concept right. If you're looking for statutory definitions, we could do that. If you really want to do a snooze fest, I could certainly do it. I'd be glad to do it. And I prefer nothing I prefer to do. When it comes to regulations, I just love that stuff and I memorize them all. Go
I
ahead.
have a question. Is any of the jurisdictions been working with the CERT teams, the citizen emergency response teams? I know Portland has something to that effect.
Portland has,
You're up.
other jurisdictions should, I know that I was in the CERT team when I lived in Beaverton, and they're pretty active all over, but Portland Nets, which are the equivalent of CERT.
So I'm not hearing that as a component of what we've been discussing so far, and it is supposed to be done. That's what I'm
I don't know what's happened. The net teams here in Portland, there are several thousand of them. They're organized by neighborhood. So the plan isn't totally set yet, but the switch from having the fire do windshield, that very first broad thing, might be net teams doing it. I just don't think we're working on the earthquake plan right now. I don't think that's set. But you would use that. And the Portland Nets have their own damage assessment, GIS thing, and their own app that they use. They're not on the city thing, because our city one is enterprise, and you can't let non-city people on it. But they do have their own one to do their own kind of building safety of what's going on in their neighborhood.
There would be tremendous crossover with these highly skilled, well-trained, professional groups. And our colleague from SEA behind you. You're still.
Yeah, and I'll cover it. I have, like, in my 10 minutes this afternoon.
You're up.
There's, okay, I'll do it right now then. So,
No.
this afternoon. This afternoon.
This is where you get into how these super, things are covered. That me?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tim and Ron.